What image comes to your mind when you think of a Muslim? The terrorist, the evil medieval ruler, the anti-national, more terrorists, and terrorists again. That's some of Bollywood's Muslim tropes for you. Mix this stereotyping with the current anti-Muslim rhetoric in public discourse, and you get films like The Kashmir Files,
तलवारों और बंदूकों के जोर पर इन पंडितों को कन्वर्ट करने के लिए भेजे गए इंटायरेंट्स के सोल्जर्स। हर रोज 1500 से लेकर 2000 काफिरों को पकड़ कर लाया जाता, उनके मुंह में जबरदस्ती बीफ डाला जाता।
and Kerala Story. These films resort to blatant propaganda and hate against Muslims. More have followed and are scheduled to follow. This trend is no longer subtle. With state patronage and massive box office earnings, the films appear legitimate to the masses.
वो इस्लामिक टेरर ये चाहता ही नहीं कि हमारी अंदर की रणनीति बाहर आए। ये फिल्म उनकी रणनीतियों को बाहर निकालने के लिए है।
These are films that have contributed to a collective anti-Muslim sentiment.
ऐसे अब्दुल और सलीम और ऐसे करके स्मार्ट टाइप के बन के लड़के और लड़कियों को अच्छी अच्छी चीज़ें दिखाते हैं, मतलब बिग ड्रीम दिखाते हैं और बाद में क्या करते हैं?
Films that have led to open calls for violence against Muslims.
कोरोना तो बहुत आया और इसके बाद जो कश्मीर यहाँ बादाम और कंबल बेचने आते हैं, आत्मा ये करी कि उनका कलेजा निकाल ले और जो भी यहाँ पे मोहम्मद रह रहा है वो मस्जिद नहीं रहनी चाहिए, मस्जिद तोड़ देनी चाहिए।
Films that then become a tool of manipulation used to generate hate in service of particular political agendas.
इन दिनों आपने देखा होगा कश्मीर फाइल फिल्म की चर्चा चल रही है और जो लोग हमेशा फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन के झंडे लेकर के घूमते हैं वो पूरी जमात बौखला गई है पिछले 5-6 दिन से।
Was this bad Muslim trope always as prevalent in Indian cinema, or did something change at a point? Who is this bad Muslim?
खाना बड़ा लजीज है, हमारी मोहब्बत में बनाया है कि बंदूक के डर से है।
And who qualifies as a good Muslim?
देखो, पहली बार किसी गोरे को इंडिया का तिरंगा लहराते हुए देख रहा हूं।
What is representation and what can it do to a community? Let's look back at the films that were made about and around Muslims in the early decades of Indian cinema. As is evident, the picture was a little different. It is not to suggest that pre-partition society was not polarized, but the vision of India as a multicultural nation was somewhat strong and made its way to cinema too. Urvi Mukhopadhyay contends that in pre-partition polarized India, the film industry was faced with the challenge of pandering to an all-India market. The medieval history even then was a fragile topic for filmmakers to touch upon. They had to deal with contested opinions from both the Hindu and Muslim communities and hence mostly avoided it. Films thus presented a more pluralistic vision of the nation. Despite that, many historicals were made with Muslim rulers portrayed in a completely different light from what we see today.
These were films that actually represented these figures as carrying the values of governance, of justice, of mercy, and this was connected to the larger anti-colonial agenda, which was that Indians are capable of governing themselves. So in that sense, it is very interesting that who were these leaders or who were these figures who represented these values. In the big historical films, they were usually the Mughal emperors and some sultanate figures as well, which is of course a stark contrast to the way Alauddin Khilji is represented in Padmavat today.
One can easily compare a film clip of a Muslim king from today's cinema with one from the 1940s or 1960s, for example.
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह, आज सलीम अकबर का जानशीन बन गया। मेरे अब शहजादा नूरुद्दीन मोहम्मद सलीम की खिदमत में फरमान इरसाल।
मलिक गफूर मलिका जहां से पूछो कि आज सुल्तान के सामने खाने में क्या पेश होगा। हिरन, काबुली पुलाव, कोरमा, आलू बुखारा।
जब खाने को इतना कुछ है तो हम खौफ क्यों खाएं?
Savagery as opposed to grandeur. Hatred as opposed to friendship.
जंग का एक ही उसूल है राहुल, जीत।
जाओ, बहन की आजादी का ये झंडा तुम अपने हाथों से बुलंद करो।
बहुत खूब क़िबले आलम।
परवरदिगार, इस झंडे को हमेशा इसी शान से बुलंद रखना।
Some semblance of dignity for all parties.
हमने दो जहां के मालिक से इल्तिजा की थी, वो मंजूर हो गई। तुम्हारे भाई हुमायूं की जान बच गई।
As opposed to hate-fueled propaganda.
जिस तरह उत्तर हिंदुस्तान का पाया तख्त है दिल्ली, उसी तरह दक्खन हिंद का पाया तख्त होगा गोंधाना।
Ira Bhaskar lays out the various phases of Indian cinema's portrayal of Muslim characters and plots. There is the Muslim historical, the Muslim courtesan films, the classic Muslim social. Then you have the new wave Muslim social, which marks a shift in the representation of Muslims, focusing on the life and experiences of ordinary working and middle-class Muslim families in milieu of their larger historical, social and political background.
अरे बोलेगा तो मुसलमान लोगों को कोई काम नहीं देता है, कोई भरोसा नहीं करता उन पे, तो जिंदा कैसे रहेगा वो?
From the 80s, mid-80s onwards, especially with the beginning of the Ram Janmabhoomi sort of movement, we began to see more and more figurations of criminals, Muslims as rioters, Muslims as gangsters and that kind of thing. And then of course with the demolition of the Babri Masjid and the whole sort of Hindutva kind of frenzy around the Muslims as the evil other and so on, from the 90s onwards things began to change. But even then, through the 1990s and even the early 2000s, up to 2010 I would say, the dominant messaging, whatever the figuration of the Muslim may be, but the dominant messaging is a secular message. That, community, India is both Hindu and Muslim. Communities have to come together. But post 2014, things have changed very drastically. The reason for that is, and this a very self-conscious effort to demonize the Muslim, both the ordinary Muslim and the sultans and the emperors. They are demonized and seen as fearful, barbaric, uncivilized and so on. Padmavat is a very good example of that movement.
Now look at relatively newer cinema. The Muslim characterization in many films is quite different from what it used to be. Particularly the historicals made in recent years that portray Muslim characters as demonized, barbaric, and a threat to what is dubbed a homogeneous Indian culture. It is important to note that a film like the Kerala Story that vilifies the Muslim community was endorsed by the Prime Minister of the country, and many BJP-run states even waived taxes on it. But it was also criticized. The film was accused of fueling hate speech and manipulating facts and was banned by the West Bengal government. Many writers and academics have gone on to state that these kinds of films are made to justify the violence against Muslims and add to already existing Islamophobia. Unsurprisingly then, films propagating Hindutva conspiracy theories are often released around election time with the insidious aim of reaping the political benefit of polarization.
This government is the first government that has recognized the power of media and the power of cinema. And this is absolutely reminiscent of fascist Germany, because the same thing had happened at that time. So filmmakers in Hitler's Germany were being mobilized by the state. The most famous example is that of Leni Riefenstahl. So just as media, the then media was used by a dictator, similarly the media today is being mobilized to mainstream a discourse that is a Hindu majoritarian discourse, which others the Muslim. Primarily the Muslim, but also the Christians.
Cultural theorist Stuart defines representation as the production of meaning through language. Viewed through the lens of Gramscian hegemony, Hall argues that those in power from dominant hegemonic groups control this production of meaning. Films are not devoid of political context and power. India has one of the largest and highly diverse Muslim populations in the world. Homogenization of such a large community on screen for public consumption is not just reductive, it paves way for generating prejudice. In recent times, it's even worse because we're not just talking about a homogenized representation, but a negative homogenized representation. The Muslim terrorist has been cinema's favorite trope, and we can identify nearly a dozen films or more where Muslim characters are depicted as evil, anti-national, oppressive, and always scheming against the nation.
लाला कानून का मुजरिम बन जाता और हम कानून के साथ खेलते हैं बख्तावर।
काफिर है साला, उसे कुछ नहीं पता। बात हमारी कौम की है, तुम्हारी और मेरी कौम की, हमारे भाई बहनों की, हमारे घर की। कत्ती काफिर मारे मैंने, वो सब जाया हो जाएगा।
What we are witnessing is a trend of Muslims being portrayed as outsiders in their own homes and the formation of a Muslim other. It is a concern that writers, scholars, and academics have been extensively vocal about. Sanjeev Kumar, in his work on popular culture and Bollywood, foregrounds the use of cinema to construct this Muslim other that is the enemy to Hindu India. The revival of Muslim historical in recent years aims at portraying the nation as Hindu and feeds off the Hindutva narrative of fanatic Muslims invading the nation against the virtuous Hindu monarchs. By weaponizing history, it legitimizes Muslim dehumanization, and by showing Hindus as historically oppressed, it amplifies the Hindu nationalist call that asks for the correction of these historical injustices. The Koholite Muslim with his head covered, preferably dressed in a Pathan suit, sells as a perfect picture of a disruptive element, a terrorist, the enemy. This fixation on a certain depiction of Muslims has become so formulaic that Muslims are stereotyped even in films that are not explicitly about nationalism. The symbolization and typecasting of Muslims as terrorists gives impetus to the factually inaccurate argument, not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. As opposed to this trend of portraying vilified Muslim characters on screen, the depiction of an ultra-nationalist Muslim as good is another popular trope, still problematic even if seemingly innocent. A film named Razi came out in 2018. Sehmat, the protagonist, a Muslim college-going girl, gives up her personal life, family, and husband for national interests. A similar plot can also be seen in the 2003 film The Hero, where Reshma, played by Preeti Zinta, goes on to become an Indian spy sent to Pakistan.
देश के लिए फर्ज निभाना खाई में धकेला नहीं होता है अब्बू.
Or in the film Qurban, we see the dichotomy of a bad versus good Muslim, which is apparent in many more films. While Ehsan is shown as the bad Muslim, the terrorist, his nemesis, played by Vivek Oberoi, is a liberal who hates fundamentalism and identifies as a proud American.
Abu, we are Americans.
Many other films with Muslim protagonists in them are shown going out of their way to prove themselves as good and loyal citizens. Be it Kabir Khan from Chak De India,
7 साल के बाद मैं ये सोचकर हॉकी में वापस आया कि जिस वजह से मेरी टीम हारी थी, उस वजह को मैं एक बार हरा कर रहूंगा.
or Rizwan Khan from My Name is Khan.
मैं वापस कब आऊं मंदिरा?
तो क्यों नहीं अमेरिका के प्रेसिडेंट से ही क्यों नहीं जाके कह देते कि मिस्टर प्रेसिडेंट, my name is Khan and I'm not a terrorist.
These characterizations beg a few questions. Why do Muslim characters need to be on their toes all the time, proving their allegiance and belonging to the nation? And why is this loyalty test reserved particularly for Muslim characters? Or secondly, why does a Muslim character have to shed its Muslimness or be distant from Islam to be deemed good? Why can't a Muslim character be practicing and good? These are some questions to think about. Have you come across Muslim characters who share the same struggles, fears, motivations, heartbreaks, and dreams as you or the Muslims you know in real life do? Have any films managed to humanize their Muslim characters, show them in all their nuance and complexity?
ये क्या कर रही हैं आप? कुछ नहीं अम्मी, साइंस. आप नहीं समझेंगी.
There obviously are some, but these examples are few and far between. For instance, there are films that are specifically about communal violence and the Muslim community that are able to flesh out the ordinariness of its Muslim characters, like Firaq, Shahid, or Naseem. These films attempt to show the impact of larger events on the lives of ordinary people and their everyday life.
कहाँ जाएं भाई? हम तो यहीं के हैं.
Naseem, for example, is a film about how the life of a middle-class Muslim family located in Bombay is affected by the communal riots during the Ram Janmabhoomi campaign. It shows how the event changes the quality of their lives, giving rise to anxieties, and how 3 different generations of the family respond to the unfolding violence on their television set differently. An example from non-mainstream cinema is the recent film Kayo Kayo Color. It is a story about a ghettoized working-class Muslim family in Gujarat and their everyday life. The film manages to capture the mundanity, dignified complexity, and everydayness of the lives of these common people. We see children playing, women just having conversations in domestic spaces, the culture and practices of Muslim people, their spaces depicted in a documentary-like aesthetic gives dignity to the characters in the community. Mainstream Bollywood too has some saving grace. You have Muslim characters like Farhan Qureshi in 3 Idiots or Imran Qureshi in Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara dealing with their own problems like other characters in these films. Or the secondary character of a reporter in Bajrangi Bhaijaan. Chand Nawab is a fun, comedic yet rounded character whose presence in the film is unforgettable. Yet another well-developed character is Safina from Gully Boy. She is fierce, ambitious, possessive, and can also be unlikable, shattering the stereotypical heroine image in all its complexity. What are other such examples that you can think of? When we talk about representation, questions about inclusion and diversity become important, not just on screen, but behind it too. Because who tells our stories matters. And so we leave you with this question. Think about it. Who is telling Kerala stories and who is telling Kayo Kayo Color?